All right. Hello, Mr. Drake. My name is Jordan, and we're going to be asking you a few questions today about your military service and your life as a whole. And our first question is what events led you to joining the Army Air Force?
Well, I lived in Pasadena, California in the 36, 1939. Lockheed Aircraft Corporation was building a plane called a P-38 twin-engine fighter, and I would see that flying over Pasadena. And as soon as I turned 18 years of age, why, President Roosevelt had lowered the age from 21 to 18 for flying cadet training. And so I knew I wanted to fly that P-38. So I enlisted and became an aviation cadet, went through the Santa Ana Army Air Base. The late 1930s. Army Air Base is still, I guess, in existence over there. It's Orange Coast College today.
Yeah. What was your first major assignment in the Army Air Force, and could you describe it?
Well, after I got through with my training, I wound up in England, about 69 miles northeast of Ipswich, England, Ipswich is about 69 miles north of London. I was in the 479th Fighter Group, 434th Fighter Squadron. A group contained 3 squadrons, and each squadron had 16 airplanes, so 3 times 16 is 48 airplanes. And our main job was escorting the bombers over Europe and doing strafing runs over in France and into Germany and the lowland countries. And that was our main job during World War II.
Right. And yeah, well, kind of the next question was, where did you go throughout Europe during your combat tours? But you already mentioned the lowland countries in Germany. Did you go anywhere else in Europe, or just mainly that area?
Well, I was stationed in England, so we flew over most all of the countries in Europe there. And then when I came home, they made me an instructor down in Texas at an advanced flying school down there. And so then the war was over, and then I got out of the service, and I stayed in the Reserve Corps for over 25 years. And when 1949 or 50, I couldn't pass the eye exam anymore because I was a reservist. I was a civilian, but going on active duty every summer and doing some flying, but I couldn't pass the eye exam anymore, so they made me a finance officer. So I spent the rest of my time as a finance officer, and I'd go on active duty every summer for 2 weeks, and 1 weekend a month during the rest of the year I'd go on active duty for 2 days, and I'd get paid for that, And by then I had 4 kids, and I needed the money.
Yeah, no, I get it. And could you describe, since you were an Air Force pilot, could you describe any dogfights you had during the war?
Oh gosh, I was in quite a number of dogfights with the Germans, and I was not that good. I only got one Focke-Wulf 109, and the only way I got him, he got in front of me, and I happened to pull the trigger, and I hit him, and he bailed. And then I got 3 on the ground, and other than that, some of my roommates or squadron members, they were getting 3 and 4 and 5 victories, but I wasn't as good as they were, Mm-hmm. So it was a matter of chance what you'd run into there. If you run into a German pilot that's better than you, you're not going to get him, But if you run into one that's not as good as you, your chances were much better there. So, but my landings and takeoffs all equaled one another, so I never had to bail out there. And I completed 68 missions during the war, and I was there. It took me just about a year before, once you've completed your missions, you're eligible to come home. And so it took me just about 11 months to complete the 68 missions, and then they came home and made me a flight instructor for pilots going to the Southwest Pacific there, because the war wasn't over in the Southwest Pacific till many months later there.
Yes, so you helped pilots that were going to fight in the Pacific Theater.
Mm-hmm.
And next one is, could you describe your role and experience during your support of the D-Day landings?
That was June 6, 1944, and my squadron, we were flying There's a P-38, and this is an easily recognized airplane from the troops on the ground because it's twin-tailed, twin-engine. And we patrolled the beachhead from Calais, France to Bordeaux, France, which is about a 230-mile run up and down the channel. The channel is 22 miles wide at the nearest point there. And that would take about an hour and a half to 2 hours to make that run. And our sole job that day was just to keep the Germans out of the sky. General Eisenhower was a commanding general, and he wanted to control the skies, and we did. Because June the 6th, I didn't see one German, because there were probably 200 or 300 of us almost around the clock patrolling that beachhead. And because 11 o'clock at night, it was still some daylight, because we were on double daylight savings time there. So we could fly up till 10:30 at night and still have a little bit of daylight there. So Eisenhower wanted to control the skies, and we did.
So you didn't meet that much German resistance?
Not on D-Day. There were so darn many of us, I guess the Germans were afraid to come up.
They just scrammed. And what was your last assignment in the Air Force, and could you describe it?
My last assignment was in the Air Force. They made me a flight instructor out in Ontario, California. You know where that is today? And that was a P-38 training unit for pilots going to the Pacific. And that was my last flying assignment there, and I was there until the war was over then. And that's when I got out of the service.
Right, and then you stayed in the reserves?
Then I stayed in reserve for 25 years.
Right. And what did you do after you got out of the service? What did you do after you got out of the service? And
I went back. So I just barely got out of high school because Roosevelt lowered the age from 21 to 18 for flight training, and I just graduated from high school, and so I went back and went to college for 2 years, and then a acquaintance through another friend introduced me to a savings bank owner. And he says, "Would you like to go to work for me?" And I said, "Well, I'll try it." Well, I stayed there for 40 years with that one company. And I wound up chairman of the board of the company there after all those years there. So it was a finance business is what it was.
Right,
there.
Right. I see. Well, thank you, sir, for your service and your time today.
Thank you. Are people out there interested in old flying stories, are they?
Well, I am. Personally, I am.
Oh, I guess of all 68 missions, I probably the one that came the closest of not making it was October 30th of 1943, 44. The landing was over, and we were on the march to Germany, to Berlin, and we were over just short of Berlin, escorting some bombers, and the leader was Colonel Zemke, and he was here. His wingman was here, and I was here, and my wingman was here. There's 4 of us, and we were escorting the bombers, and then we lost the bombers and through some heavy cloud cover, and so we went through this cloud cover, and the last I saw of my 3 guys, they all 3 went down, and the Germans never fired a shot because when you get into a cloud cover, all your instruments tumble, and you don't know whether you're upside down or what. And I knew I was upside down because my parachute belt was hanging in front of me. That shouldn't be, because I was like this there. And I started out at 30,000 feet, and I'd watch my airspeed indicator get up to 400, 500 miles an hour. I must be going straight down. And I'd get it out of it, and it'd fall off to 0. And I knew, well, I must be going straight up, because there's no way of telling what you're doing, because vertigo sets in. And you know what vertigo is?
It's when it's spinning.
Your brain gets all scrambled, and you have no idea what position you're in. You could be upside down, and you thought you were right side up. You know?
Right.
And so I managed to get out of it. I was in a P-51 in this airplane at that time. That one, and I pulled 9 Gs getting out of that dive in this airplane. The only thing that saved my life was I had a G suit on. You know what a G suit is? It's a suit with bladders in the legs and bladders across the stomach. And when you pull G's, they fill up with air and put a lot of pressure. And this keeps blood from leaving your brain.
Oh, right. Yeah.
And so pulling 9 G's, that thing just filled up like that and keeps the blood from draining into your legs. And so that saved my life, that G suit there. And so after that, well, I got home and I'd finished my 68 missions, then they sent me home.
This is another question. We understand that World War II is more of like a conflict between countries and ideologies, but what do you think about some of the wars today in Afghanistan and more of the recent ones?
Yeah, it's hard to compare the two, because actually during World War II, Hitler and Mussolini and Hirohito were the 3 Axis powers in the world. And the war started actually in 1939 when Hitler marched into Poland. And of course, we didn't get into it till December 7th of 1941 when the Japs bombed Pearl Harbor there. Today, when you look at these Afghan wars, I just wonder if those guys want to fight amongst themselves, why not let them kill one another? Yeah. And to get involved in a ground war in Afghanistan or one of those places there, I think and particularly if China got into it, we're going to lose there. And I think Trump is smart enough not to do that. So, or at least I hope he is.
Yeah. Yeah. So, do you guys have any other questions? And then if you do, just tell me, and then I'll tell him.
I'll just stop it for now.
War started, I turned 18 years old, and you either got drafted or you enlisted in the service. And I knew I wanted to fly because I saw that P-38 fly over Pasadena, because it was manufactured in Burbank, California. And so I went down to the recruiting line, got in line, and gosh, it took me, I don't know, 40 or 50 minutes just to get to the recruiting desk. There were so many of us trying to enlist there. When I got to the line, well, the guy says, you got to go to Glendale to apply for cadet training. So I went to Glendale, which is a city right next door to Pasadena, and got in line over there. And after a couple hours in line, I finally got to the desk. And they says, well, okay. Took me in, gave you a quick physical exam, eyes or ears, a hearing exam, your eyes were the basic ones they looked at, and sent me home. And I waited and waited at home for maybe 2 months, and then I got orders to report to Santa Ana Army Air Base, which is Orange Coast College today. And that's where I started.
Did you happen to receive any medals as a result of your service?
Yeah, I got 2 DFCs and some air medals there. But I was no hero. I just did my job as best I could. And some of my squadron mates, they became aces. If you got 5 airplanes, shot down 5, you became an ace, you know. I never was. I just got 1. But several of my squadron mates, they were, of course, much better than I in the fighting, air-to-air combat. And they would get their 5, and some of them got as many as 6 or 7 there. My CO got 17 of them, but he 17 or 18 of them. But I was with him the day he went down, and he became a prisoner of war in Germany. But I got home, and he went to prison camp.
Did he make it out of the prison camp?
Yeah, he got out, and I saw him after the war, and maybe a couple of years after the war. He was a full colonel, and I was just first lieutenant, you know. So there's you don't you and a full colonel don't have much in common there. But anyway, I saw him after the war, and I said, "What happened, Colonel?" And he says, "Well," he says, "we're in P-51s," and he says, when that P-51 reached about 480 miles an hour going straight down, the wing came off. And he says, I bailed and broke his leg getting out of the, hit the wing or some darn thing. And he became a prisoner of war. And since his colonel, he was outranked the colonel that was there in the Stalag 1, Stalag 2, he became the commanding officer for the Americans in the prison camp. And so he spent the war to the end of the war in prison camp. And then when the war was over, well, he was, you know, the Russians actually set him free because the Russians marched in from the other front, the Eastern Front, and we were going from the Western Front. And so the Russians reached his prisoner of war camp before we did, and so the Russians released him there. And so he says it was quite an interesting ceremony that the Russians put on when they took over the camp there. So,
did he go to a prisoner of war camp or to a concentration camp?
Prisoner of war camp, yeah. If you were a pilot and got shot down and the Luftwaffe got you, then you were treated pretty good there. But if the Wehrmacht, which was the German army, got you, you weren't treated as nice there. And so being an Air Force pilot and getting captured by the German Air Force, why, you weren't treated great, but you were treated a lot better than if a lot.
I was just wondering, did being in the Air Force or military help you at all during your later in life, like when you were chairman of that company or anything?
Well, I don't know how much it helped me, although I learned a lot being in the service, and I certainly learned discipline, and I learned what it meant to be on time, and what it meant to follow orders, and to a lot of extent how to give orders and expect them to be followed, you know. And so I think that's probably where I learned the most there. And then, as luck would have it, I happened to know one of the fellows that his dad owned the company, and that helped there.
Did you ever see or personally see any prisoner of war concentration camps in your time, or no?
No, only from the air. I've never been close to one. And I've seen friends of mine after the war that were in those camps and talked to them about it, but personally I never saw one.
I think that's it. Do you have anything else to add, Chris?
No. Well, thank you